Hello, assalamu alaikum everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining us for this, our keynote session of the Muslim Women in Sport Network's Summit virtual conference that we're holding for the first time ever. We have with us an amazing athlete, woman, Muslima, Bilqis Abdul-Qaadir, and we're going to introduce her in a second. But just before we go to that, just so you know, today's topic obviously is athlete activism. We had a fantastic session earlier on with a couple of asmas from across the world. And we're going to talk today more one-on-one in this session with Bilqis, as I said. The hashtag for the session today is MWSN Summit 2018, and it's the same for the whole summit. So please do tweet your questions to us, and also put your questions and comments in the box on the YouTube channel that you're watching right now as well. So let's move to Bilqis, the woman that we're really interested to find out more about, and we're going to hear about her journey very shortly. But just briefly, obviously, Bilqis has been a record-breaking athlete, varsity basketball player at high school, played on to college at the University of Memphis, at Indiana State as well, and a real athlete activist, really embodies what an athlete activist has been about, but really it was put on her. So she was ready to go pro, as it were. She wanted to play across Europe, pro basketball, but Fiba's hijab ban really prevented her from doing that. And we're going to hear kind of her journey in that space, what that meant for her in a second. But she's an award-winning woman. She didn't let that ban stop her from carrying on, and that's what we want to really hear about during this session and what we're going to explore. So welcome, Bilqis. Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate this. This is an honor, honestly.
It's an absolute honor to have you here. Honestly, we've been watching your journey over the years, and we've been with you throughout that time. So why don't you tell us in your own words what that journey's been like?
So it's been a long one. I began playing basketball at the age of 3 or 4. And I remember receiving like my first actual basketball hoop, which was like a little plastic hoop that my parents bought me for a birthday, I believe. And it was the one that was like adjustable. And they put it in my dining room. And that was it from there. I'm the youngest of 8, so I have 4 sisters and 3 brothers. We grew up in Springfield, Massachusetts, which many people don't know that is the birthplace of basketball. And so it was kind of innate for us to go ahead and pick up the ball. And so aside from that, basketball is a very cheap sport to play. And what I mean by that is, growing up in a large family, we weren't well off, low income household. So if you had a ball and you could find a hoop, then that was it. It was it for you. So it was easy. It was an easy sport to play. And early on, it was just something that I loved to do. And at about 12 or 13 years old is when I realized I was pretty good at it. A lot of other people saw that as well. And I remember a conversation my parents having about just how expensive college was. And again, I'm the youngest of 8. My parents had to pay out of pocket for tuition for my older siblings. And my mother said to myself and my brother right above me, and she just mentioned, you're going to have to get a scholarship, whether it's academic or athletic. I don't know how you're going to do it, but, kind of figure it out. So at a young age of 12 or 13, I didn't want to see my parents go through any more of a financial burden. And so I remember just at that moment, it clicked for me. So my goal was I'm going to get an athletic scholarship to help my parents out. I was, of course, I wasn't bad in the classroom. I was actually a pretty good student, but I knew that I loved basketball. And if I could go somewhere with basketball, I was going to do it. I was going to do that. So that was my goal. And it became a grind after that. When I tell you, like, slept with the ball, literally, I would have the basketball in my bed. Whatever moves I saw my brothers do, I wanted to imitate that. So I had someone to look up to try to better my skills. And so I played basketball with boys all the way up until I was around 13 years old. And it was just at that time, there were not a lot of girls teams in my community. I was always the only girl on the team. And, the boys were just that much more competitive at that age. And it was good for me, until I reached kind of that teenage hood and my parents were like, okay, it's time for you to play with girls now. We all know how that goes, especially as a young Muslim girl. So we switched over, and switched over. I started playing for girls teams, and from then on, you know, I was kind of always the best one on the team. Alhamdulillah, thank God. But it became just something that I knew I wanted to play for the rest of my life when I realized that I was just very talented and everything came really easy. And around my high school years, I was homeschooled all the way up until 8th grade. And I was uncovered. I wasn't hijabi yet. And my freshman year of high school is when everything happened. So in my family, my parents are reverts to Islam. And my mother converted to Islam when she was around 24. My father converted after. So my mother was previously married before my father. And he ended up becoming Muslim. They got married, alhamdulillah, and here I am. So I'm the only child from my parents. But growing up, like as an African-American Muslim, you know, we don't have any culture or any like cultural baggage, you know, as in like for us, it was us Quran and Sunnah. Like we followed the Quran and we followed the way of the Prophet, peace be upon him. So there was no in between. And I knew that when the day came for me to wear hijab, which, you know, we thought once you hit puberty, that's when you are to wear it. There was no choice. There was no wear it when you're ready. So when that day came, and when I say that day, it was when I had my first menstrual cycle. I was a pretty late bloomer. I began to wear hijab, and it was right before my first high school season. So the year prior, as an 8th grader, I played in high school, but I was uncovered. I looked like everybody else. So that freshman year rolls around and things got a little difficult. And hijab in general was difficult for me. At that time, of course, I didn't understand the beauty of it. I didn't understand why. I didn't really understand Islam as a whole. So I just remember the only place where I felt like I fit in and I didn't care about what people thought about me while wearing hijab was on the court. And aside from getting taunted like almost every game, because a lot of people didn't recognize it was me from the year before. But after people started to learn about me, of course, that respect was there because I was a good player. But we would play in a lot of like Catholic schools, you know, majority Caucasian audiences, and it used to get bad. And so, you know, I kind of used that as my ammo. Like, it made me go harder. Like, it made me want to score more points every time I went out on the court. But really, basketball helped me fit in as far as, you know, as being a teen and not really being different. So basketball was like my tool to kind of stay with the crowd at that time. And so it goes on. You know, I had a very successful high school career. I became the highest leading scorer in Massachusetts. I beat Rebecca Lobo, who is an Olympian, a WNBA champion, very awesome woman. And so, you know, I had a little bit of clout with me going into college. So I was grateful enough, blessed enough to get a full scholarship to a Division I university. And I became like the first Muslim woman to play covered in college basketball. All of these great things were going on. And, you know, I had my eyes set on a pro career. And so my senior season rolls around in college, and I ended up getting an agent. And of course, the agent is the person who helps you get a job overseas. And, you know, I wanted to play in the WNBA. I tried out. Unfortunately, maybe I wasn't good enough, or at that time, you know, they weren't really looking for an athlete like myself. I thought I was good enough, but, you know, God's plans are always greater. So I was okay with that. But I knew that it was very political on that side. And I wanted to go overseas just because it's more experience. And if you ask a WNBA player today, I actually just read an article last night. One of the players was like, you get treated like an NBA player over there as a female athlete, as a woman athlete. And so they actually like it better overseas rather than being in the WNBA. So that was very interesting to read. However, again, I had my eyes set on overseas international basketball. And one day I get an email. I forget, it was either a phone call or an email from my agent. However, she conveyed that she came across the Fiba ruling. And, you know, after hearing it, I was just like, oh, no problem. Like, I played with hijab on, all covered up in college. It should be no issue. Let's tell them why I wear it. You know, I'm Muslim, so this is my choice. And unfortunately, it wasn't that easy. So Fiba responds initially saying that, oh, well, we want to keep the game of basketball religiously neutral. And I'm like, you know, well, if you want to do that, then people who wear tattoos of crosses or scriptures or biblical verses, whatever the case may be, should have to cover those up. And with that response, they knew that they didn't have a leg to stand on. And they responded back saying, oh, well, you know, according to this rule, all of a sudden they bring up this headgear rule that you could possibly injure someone with your scarf. And so you can't battle. It's hard to battle safety. You know, as soon as a sport, an organization throws in safety, like it sticks, you know. And so at that point, I realized it wasn't going to be that easy to get this rule out of the way. And personally, it was a crossroad that I was at. I didn't think about fighting it right after learning about the rule. I didn't even know what else to do, you know, as far as getting them to understand who I was. Maybe you could watch some film of me playing to see that I didn't hurt anybody or myself. And so at that moment, I realized it wasn't an opportunity anymore for me to play professionally. And I questioned a lot at that moment. I still kind of get emotional a little bit because it was a time where I questioned Islam. I questioned wearing hijab. And I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I began researching other faiths, other religions, just because I'm like, why would God put me in a position to choose between something that I loved and, you know, who I was? And the contradiction was that the same hijab that led me to this opportunity to be able to play basketball and show who I was as a Muslim, you know, the same hijab led me to meet President Obama. I still think he's my president. I still say that. Was able to get a full scholarship to school. I was this standout, you know, I became like this image for Muslim women. And that was the same scarf that prevented me from reaching my dream. So that's where I was so confused. And many people would come up to me saying, well, why don't you just take your scarf off and then put it on after the game? And, you know, my immediate response would be, oh, no, you know, my scarf means more than that. It's not just a piece of material. But deep down, it truly didn't. You know, it didn't mean more to me than just being a scarf. And so I had to figure out how to change that feeling about what I was going through. And I remember just realizing that there was no human being that was helping me get through that phase. There was no person that could give me the right advice. My parents, my close friends, no person was helping me. And I realized that as a Muslim, after everything else that we do, we go to prayer. And I remember this prayer like it was yesterday. It's so crazy. I remember this prayer and it wasn't a special prayer. I feel like it was Maghrib. It was Isha. It was at night. I remember. But I was in sajda. I was in sujood. And I couldn't get up. And sujood is the part of our prayer where it's the lowest part of our prayer. We put our head to the ground. And of course, you know that. But whoever is listening, they may not. But I remember being in that position. And I swear that I couldn't get up. And it was the first time that I started to cry. I'm 24 years old, 23 years old at that time. I never once cried in a prayer. I never once felt something in my prayer when I prayed. And I remember just being in sajda, feeling that I couldn't get up. And I'm like, you know what? I'm going to ask God to help me, to guide me, because clearly I was questioning my faith. And after that prayer, I swear it was like divine intervention after that. The following week after that prayer, things were, I'm sorry.
Who's here? Oh. Okay.
Yeah, sorry. It's okay. I'm sorry. I'm in a school. However, after that prayer, I felt like it was divine intervention. Things started to happen that I couldn't imagine. It was like the next week I was called to speak in front of a non-Muslim group of girls, athletes at this school. And I'm sharing my story. And I'm like, little things like that were happening. Then I was getting tagged in Facebook and social media of pictures of young Muslim girls wanting to wear hijab and have a basketball in their hand saying, I want to be just like you. So at that moment, I realized that, you know what? This is no longer about me. It's bigger than basketball. It's bigger than myself. And if I don't help make this change, then who else is going to do it? And so then I remember randomly Indira Kaljo was searching for me. So she's like messaging me on YouTube here, there. You know, I had met her years ago. And she reached out saying she was going to do this petition to go against Fiba's ban because it affected her as well. And her story is very interesting. However, I was very apprehensive because Fiba even said, you know, well, do a petition. It doesn't matter. It's not gonna affect us. And so I almost was like, I don't even want to fight it. You know, I was sick. You know, I didn't know how to do it. I wasn't ready to fight it. She convinced me. I joined in, and we got over 130,000 signatures. That didn't budge Fiba. And after that, it was years and years of advocacy work, articles, news, video, vlogs, whatever. And I'm literally, for the past 4 years, have been doing the same interview over and over. Can you imagine how annoying and irritating it was to answer the same questions to so many different people over and over and over again? And at one point, I would say like a year and a half ago, I was so done. And I was only done because I felt like, you know what, maybe I learned the lesson that God was trying to teach me through this. And I feel like through that struggle, God took away basketball to humble me, number one, because I thought I was better than who I was, thought I was somebody special, important, because I had this little fame that we often get caught up in. And number two, I was able to re-identify as a Muslim. And I say that I feel like I just took my declaration of faith, my shahada, 4 years ago, when I made that decision to fight against Fiba instead of conform to them. And so that's what I'm truly thankful for. And, you know, I feel like God was testing me. You know, this is my first test of faith. So I believe that, you know, in our faith in Islam, everything happens for a reason. And that's very cliche to say, but now I see why. And I miss basketball very much. I really do. Like, I can't watch it sometimes because I want to get out on the court and play. And the thing is, I still can play, so it's hard to kind of draw that line. However, I think I have more of an impact on not only Muslims, but non-Muslims as well, now that I'm speaking and I'm sharing my story and I'm able to break down these barriers between Islam and the rest of the world.
That is so powerful and emotional, that whole story. And thank you so much for being so honest and open about it and sharing that with us. I was actually, you know, the ban was overturned just over a year ago now, wasn't it? Or it was about a year ago. And I remember at the time looking back at the emails that you and I exchanged, because we exchanged emails, I think, back in 2014 about this. And I remember, you know, reaching out to people at FIFA that I'd spoken to around the hijab ban that they'd put in football, and trying to, you know, Prince Ali's team, trying to get him to support with this particular ban. And we were doing so much. And I could, even though I didn't know you, through the emails, I could sense, you know, the heartache that you were going through at the time. And how did it feel? It was just you thinking about your future in the sport and what you wanted to do. You know, you wanted to go and play on the continent. And, you know, was it isolating for you? Did you feel like you had people coming to help you? You know, what took it to that next level for you?
Initially, I did feel isolated. Almost felt like the only one. And not only because I was the only one trying to play at that level at that time that I knew of. But I felt like something was wrong with me because I was questioning my faith. And I'm like, are there any other Muslims going through what I'm going through or what I'm feeling in my heart? You know, of essentially feeling like I want to leave my faith because it's preventing me from my dream in this world, you know. But what took me to the next level and understanding what was going on was when I met with other Muslim athletes. And this was like in a small setting. And I met with Hussein Abdullah, his brothers. I met with Ibtihaj Muhammad at the time. I met with Ryan Harris, who was another NFL player. And then amongst the athletes, there were like rappers and poets and artists who are very well known in their communities, and they were Muslim as well. So when I met with them, and it was almost like a session where everybody kind of put their issues in a pile, and then you've seen what everybody else is going through, and then you're like, okay, wait, let me take mine back because it's not that bad. So at that moment, when I was able to meet other people who were kind of, you know, trying to balance their image on social media or within communities and then their personal image, it was like, okay, now it's making sense. You know, I'm not the only one that is battling with trying to keep my faith intact and still be a representative of Muslim women or African-American Muslim women or just a woman in general. And at that moment, I realized, like I said, this rule does need to be changed because I'm not going to be the only one. And then as the story goes on and you have other people joining the fight, so like Asma, who you guys heard earlier today, again, Indira, all of these advocacy programs, yourself, all of these different advocacy organizations who are helping Muslim women, you know, project their voice. I'm like, now I started to feel the help, and people started to understand this rule is bogus. Why is it even intact? You know, there's no way it should be here. So it took some time. I would say about a year or so that I had to come out of that shell and probably open up myself to what was out there and the help that I could get to try to beat Fiba.
And it's interesting what you were just saying in terms of even Fiba and FIFA, right? So the parallels between the two sports and what they did was so similar. So with FIFA, when the ban first came into place, it was a similar thing, right? So they said it's the religious, political statements that aren't allowed on a football field. And it was exactly the same argument around, okay, so what are you going to do about tattoos and people coming onto the pitch, drawing crosses on their body, etc. And you know, it then turned into something that was more, okay, it's a referee's call, it's about safety. And you're right, how do you argue with that? And I know that it took about 2 years of testing a hijab. You know, you and I, we play sport every single day of our lives, right? But we know we've never heard of one incident where a hijab has either caused a problem to the individual or to any member of a team or opposition. We know that. But we had to prove ourselves. We had to prove our presence. How does it feel, you know, really, in terms of the fact that it's interesting you said something about that you felt as though your hijab was preventing you from playing sport, but actually, I don't know whether this would be, you know, accurate for you, but looking back on it, it's almost as if actually your faith didn't stop you from playing sport, Fiba did. Would that be an accurate reflection?
Yes, actually, yeah, now that I think about it in that manner, absolutely, because if they weren't questioning hijab, then I probably would be playing somewhere. But again, you know, it's hard for me to even just put only Fiba in the mix because I needed to change myself internally as well. And who knows, if Fiba didn't have that rule and I was overseas playing, I wouldn't be the woman or the Muslim woman I am now. And so I don't even blame, you know, I blame Fiba, but then I don't want to blame Fiba because it was supposed to happen to me. And I'm grateful that they had that rule intact. And so in retrospect, I wish I saw it how I see it now. And now I can say that, you know, I actually met with Fiba a few months ago.
Oh, okay.
And
how was that?
It was terrible. It was terrible. I was in a room full of men. no other women in this meeting. It was only about 4 or 5 of us. And after coming out of the meeting, I know exactly why it took so long. These 2 representatives that they had were very insensitive. They didn't care about a Muslim girl trying to play basketball. It was evident, you know, when I shared my story with them, and, you know, what the goal was to try to get them to, in the future, maybe use a different process or different protocols to, you know, to help get these rules to be removed faster if they ever came upon something similar to this situation. Mm-hmm. And they were like, why are we going backwards? What's the point? You got the rule is gone now, you know, like, get out of our face, basically. Mm-hmm. And I was just like, I actually broke down in tears, not because I was sad, but because I was so angry. I wanted to really slap all of them in the room. I just couldn't.
Well done for controlling yourself.
But it made sense as to why it took so long, because it was on the back burner the whole time.
Okay, and that's really interesting. I think between all of us globally, we should start a Bilqis for Fiba campaign to get you on there to try and bring a bit of diversity and representation, you know. Yes. But no, we've got a question actually on YouTube. So from one of our watchers, from our viewers, they're asking, what would you say were the key lessons in this journey during the campaign that you learned?
I learned that that you can no longer, if you don't fit the norm, we cannot measure like our success or our identity in the eyes of society, if you want to call it. Because, you know, through that journey, there were 3 things that I began to question about myself that I couldn't change. And number 1, that I was a woman. Number 2, that I'm a Black woman. And number 3, that I'm a Black Muslim woman. And in society's eyes, I'm looked at as at the bottom. I'm looked at the bottom. You know, we're looked at as if we are not going to succeed at anything. And it was a time where, you know, I didn't want to be those 3 things because it's really a disadvantage, you know, but I learned very fast to not measure my success or who I am in the world's eyes, because if I did, then FIBA wouldn't have removed that rule, or I wouldn't be a basketball player right now if I did, or received a full education to college or university. And so I think that's one thing that we as people, we as women especially, need to not do, because that's what people don't expect much from us.
And that's really interesting about how, you know, kind of you, for a long time, you kind of saw yourself, I guess what you're saying is through society's eyes, but here through sport, you found your inner power. So yes, there was the test that came your way and you worked through it, you got closer to God in your eyes, as well as the fact that you actually found yourself and you got closer to yourself, I think is a fair reflection.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And you also spoke a little bit about kind of your family's influence, right? So you've got loads of older siblings, clearly, that you played around. But I think what was coming out for me was the importance of that support for an athlete in terms of your family, your brothers and sisters, but also your parents. What was that like growing up? So kind of how important was that in your whole journey, including this, you know, this time with the whole band and kind of trying to figure out your life?
Honestly, my family has been, you know, my rock, and I'm sure everybody can say that. However, you know, all of us have unique families, and I can definitely say I have a very unique family. And, you know, from that, you know, all of my siblings chose their own path, you know, in life. Even my parents as well. Like I said, very short story. My parents are reverts to Islam, like I mentioned. My mother was actually married twice before my father. She had 6 children before she married my father. And she was a single mother for 5 years until she actually met my father again later in life. So it's funny, my parents grew up around the corner from each other as like youth. And they used to call themselves dating when they were in elementary and middle school. And then at high school, they kind of went their separate ways. And years go by after like kind of high school years. And again, my mother, you know, lived her own life. My father lived his own life. And the year in which my mother was, you know, was a single mother raising 6 children, she mentioned to a group of her friends saying that if she were to ever meet my father, at the time his name was Charles, if she were to ever meet him again, that she would marry him. She was like, I don't know how I would do it, but I'm going to marry him. She says, she swears. Not too long after, there's a weird man at her doorstep looking for her, and it was him. And so he goes in to give her a hug, and she's like, no, I'm Muslim now. You can't touch me. And so he's like, what does that mean? You know, he said he's heard of Muslims and things like that, but he didn't really understand it. So he thought from his story, he thought that he could kind of sway her and persuade her from what she was following. And he was like, she was so firm in what she was taught and what she was believing in that she was not budging. And so she said soon after meeting him, she remembered making dua prayer every night, like that he would become Muslim, that he would accept Islam. I don't know how long later, but he ends up calling her and giving her salams. And she was like, I was going to melt over the phone. And then it was soon after they got married, and it was a pretty cool love story, you know. But both of my parents, definitely my mother, just a strong woman. And to be able to raise children in one part on her own is very, very difficult. And so she made sure that we were involved in sport. She made sure she homeschooled us all. So that really shows her strength in general. And then, you know, my father, he had a few issues as well. At one point in my life, he was not in my daily life. He had a drug addiction at one point in his life. And him going through, I'm a daddy's girl, so him going through that during that time he was away, that was we were both each other's motivation. So when he was away, actually, I believe he was incarcerated or in a rehabilitation center at the time. I would be on the news for playing basketball. And people other people in there were like, is this your daughter on TV? And so he remembers the first time seeing me on the news. And he was like, after seeing me and seeing me in the news articles and things, you know, every time I was in the news, the newspaper, people would bring him an article. And he would say, you know, that I was his motivation to get out of the situation he's in. So I'm grateful he's healthy, he's better now, but we were each other's motivation. And I know that of the talent that I had coming up in high school was because of him trying to be seen so that he could see me. So beautiful. My parents, they
we just lost Bilqis for a second. Are you still there, Bilqis?
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah, sorry, he's just froze for a second. That's a really beautiful, way of putting it. I think it shows your strength. And actually, one of the things that I was thinking of as you were telling your story as well, you said that you were focused on the scholarship as well. You know, that you had to get the scholarship if you wanted to go to college and high school, and you had to get that basketball scholarship, and you focused on it so much and you got it. It feels like you're a very determined person, obviously, and athletes tend to have that within them. Was there ever a time when you were going, you actually spoke about this a little bit, was there a time, was this possibly the only time actually with the hijab ban situation where you thought, you know what, I am going to give up? Has there been any other situation? Because it feels like you're someone who will follow through right to the end. So for you to feel that I'm going to give up on this, it must have been a huge thing.
Absolutely. I would say another time in my life where I felt like I was going to kind of not give up on basketball, but give up on the situation I was in. And that was a few of the years in my college career. It was very tough. As a Division I athlete, you know, it's no longer fun and games. It becomes your job. You know, and even though you're getting school paid for, you are working to pay that money back through your effort, through your work ethic, and, you know, through your performances. And, you know, in college basketball here in the U.S., it's tough. Coaches don't really care much about you as a human being. They kind of worry about their wins and losses. And so I dealt with some of that, and I was ready to quit at some point in my college career. But, you know, again, like you said, just, you know, having to be strong, whether it's family issues, whether it's, you know, personal issues, whatever, you push through. And it's something innate, I think, that all athletes have. You know, when you have that goal, you don't quit. There's no room to quit. And, you know, going suicides and running sprints and lifting weight, there's no room to slack off. So I think the first time that I tasted that feeling of defeat was against FIBA, but as we, you know, I didn't succumb to this.
Yeah, you kept going. We've got another question here, actually, from one of our viewers. So they're saying that you mentioned, you know, all these elements of your identity: a woman, a black woman, a Muslim woman, and a black Muslim woman. They're asking, how do you balance these identities in relation to sports? So do those identities within you, do they ever challenge each other?
Absolutely, they challenge each other, and it's funny. That's actually a great question. The first challenge. Even within our own Muslim communities, there, because I'm not and the fact that I have good pronunciation. There were times when, you know, people would question, you know, if I was a revert or a convert, that I just couldn't be born Muslim. There were times when if I said an Arabic word with like the correct pronunciation, how did I learn that? And I'm like, I've been taking Quran classes and Arabic classes since day one. So, you know, even within the communities, as an African-American Muslim, there aren't places that we necessarily fit in, you know, and so that's definitely a struggle within itself. But aside from that, I don't think my identities, except for being a Muslim, but I don't think they clash with basketball. Like I said, I believe that sport is a language, and that wherever you are in the world, if you have a ball and you step on the field, whatever playing field you are, that ball speaks for you. So you don't have to speak the language. You don't have to look like this next person. If you can play whatever sport you're about to play, then you're in. So I feel like basketball for me was that safety zone where I could be all three persons at one time and it not be an issue.
What do you think? This is a very broad question, but in relation to sport, and maybe because of your meeting actually recently with FIBA, but not just to that context, what do you think needs to change for something like this to not happen again? Because it's kind of, it feels a bit inevitable. There will be another hurdle, but what needs to change for it to not happen?
Number one, I think, speaking as a Muslim, within our communities, we need to accept that sport is important amongst our youth. I think we need more of us to play, especially when you're representing, when you wear hijab and you are in hijabi. It's important that we teach sport to our young girls, because if they don't know it, then they're not going to play it. And I think that's where we lack. I think we need to put aside our cultural barriers or our differences amongst our different beliefs or faiths, and doesn't say you can't play a sport. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, who we follow, played sports. And he said, teach your children sports. Of course, back then they didn't have basketball and soccer and things of that nature, but he wanted that for our people. So it's important that we, number one, teach them or give them the opportunity so that if they do fall in love with it, they can go play. So that's number one. And number two, I think the people outside of our communities need to accept us and know that, honestly, Islam truly means to submiss. To submiss, that's all it means. To submiss yourself to God, to be in full submission to God. A Muslim is somebody who submisses themselves to God. So really, in English version, everybody's a Muslim if you believe in God. Point blank. That's just what it means. And I think people need to educate themselves, and we need to have the difficult conversations, whether it's, are you hot in the clothes that you wear?
I've had that.
Do you shower? Yeah, do you shower in it? Why do the men wear gowns? Like, these are questions that need to be asked or need to be answered, because they lead to so many other questions and leads to so many other answers. And people need to do their own research on their own faith, because what they don't know is that if you look at a picture of Mother Mary, she's covered, full hijab, full abaya, full gown, everything. The men in that time wore gowns. The fact that, people misunderstand the fact that Allah means God in Arabic. And if you look in Aramaic and other languages, God is the root. It's the same. Allah is like a root. It's a root word, So I feel like if you don't know, make yourself knowledgeable of what you don't know, and I think that right there would open the doors up. There's more of us, and people know about us, and then they accept us into these playing fields, because sport is universal and it's a right to everyone. So that would be what I think that needs to be done.
Okay. We've got a couple more questions, and then this is coming to more Bilqis, the person, the individual. So how do you define success is one question that's come through.
How do I define success? People are trying to dig deep, huh?
We didn't say it was going to be easy.
Right. Honestly, I believe that success is accepting failure. And you won't be successful until you know what it feels like to fall short, to miss, and to know that everything is not going to happen in our time or in the way we think it's supposed to happen. And that's something that I learned, and that now I understand. We set goals, we set dreams, we have all these aspirations, but at the end of the day, it's going to happen in its own time. And for me, if you're a person of faith, in God's time. And until you understand that, success isn't just waiting at the end of your degree after you walk across that stage, or, whether or not you got your first great job. That's not it, because there's so much more to it. And, success is growth. So you're never going to reach the full potential of success. I feel like we need to be present and not worry so much about the future. And that's when you'll feel a sense of just comfort, being content with what you have at the time. I think that's true success.
Okay. There's some interesting stories. Obviously, that's the sort of thing you learn through sport as well, right? That it's not always going to go the way that you planned. So massive role for sport to play in that as well, for sure. And then the final question from the viewers, steering more towards your passion for developing the next generation. Obviously, you've got the Muslim Girls Hoop 2 initiative, which is brilliant. So they're asking, what's your advice for girls pursuing an elite basketball pathway?
Ooh. If I could go back in time and redo some things, it would be train. And what I mean by train is working on fundamentals and skill work of whatever sport you play. When I went to college, as a basketball player, you want to ooh and ah the crowd with fancy moves and nice reverse layups and things like that. When you get to college or that next level, they really don't want to see that until maybe you make it to the pro level. Once you're getting paid, it's different. But trying to be an elite athlete and make it to the next level, whether it's college, university, I believe that commit your time to training and take it seriously. Eat right, treat your body right. And it's a commitment. You can't be half in and half out. And so you're going to have to know how to balance schoolwork. You're going to have to know how to balance your faith, especially if you're of faith. And then balance your sport. And then your little social life is about this big, but who cares? But it takes a lot of hard work. And I know that sounds cliche, but I would say commitment. And make sure you have a support system, because times do get hard. And yes, take breaks, because those are important. However, you can't take a break until, you reach that pro level and people are paying you to play. So it's a grind all the way up until then.
That's wonderful. Wise words for the next generation, for sure, right there. Hard work, perseverance to get through to the end, and then you'll enjoy the rewards, inshallah, yeah, God willing.
Yeah.
So my last question for you, because we're going to wrap it up really soon, is what's next for Bilqis Abdul-Qaadir?
What's next? You know, honestly, I don't have an answer for that, because I've learned in the past not to think too much about what's next. So it's a struggle for me on the daily. I'm learning how to be present and just work on my daily tasks. So right now I can say that I'm doing a lot of speaking, a lot of basketball training, and a lot of like hosting basketball camps and clinics. So I can say my focus right now is to continue to try to get rid of these stereotypes about Islam, break down these barriers between, like I said, Muslims, Islam, and whoever falls on the other side of that wall, and educate the next generation. And my goal is to instill not even just a love for basketball, but a love for physical activity, a love to you know, find that sense of self within exercise, within, you know, having fun with it. So if they fall in love with basketball, I did my job. However, I just want to, you know, make sure that our young women, not only Muslim women, but young women, whoever I work with, just, you know, love themselves through sport. And that's how I figured out how to love myself, was through sport.
Okay. Well, that's great. I'm sure, you know, God willing, there'll be so much more for you to do in terms of reaching out more widely across the globe and reaching more and more women and girls from across the globe from all kinds of backgrounds, because there is this real authenticity in your story, and it's wonderful to hear. And I just hope that more and more people hear about it, and you can have that impact that I can tell that you want to have. So thank you so much for joining us. I think in summary, all I will say is this, you know, all of us want to see that change and that development, so that we see true representation on the court, off the court, everywhere, of all of our communities. And I will be the first one to start the Bilqis for Fiba campaign, so join me on that. Thank you everyone for joining us. The next session, just so you know, for the Muslim Women in Sport Networks Summit is tomorrow at 10 a.m. UTC. I can only tell you that's 11 a.m. in London. I have to work it out for the rest of them, for the rest of the world. But we're going to be joined by Dana Abdul-Qaadir, who was the first Muslim woman to play for England, to represent the country in the UK, across the UK, and Ahida Zanetti, who created the Bertha Burkini. And we're going to talk about innovation in sports design, actually. So join us for that tomorrow. And thank you for joining us today. Take care. Assalamu alaikum. Goodbye.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.